Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Courtside with Beilinson Tennis, part of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. Fresh back from London is my co-host and Hall of Famer, Steve Flink. He looks great, so I assume he had a great trip. I know he had a one-day delay coming back, but he's back safe in New York. Steve, I want to hear briefly about your experience there, and big congrats to Barbara Krejcikova and Carlos Alcaraz, back-to-back Wimbledon champ now.
Yeah, listen, David, it was a good trip. Very unusual weather at Wimbledon this year. I mean, they needed the roof a lot of days. There was more rain than usual. It was also extremely cool. Almost every day I was over there was in the 60s. It might have topped 70 once or twice, but never near the 80s. So the players were, the good news for the players is they always were playing under good conditions, favorable conditions, whether the roof was up or not. And there wasn't ever much wind. So they had a pretty good deal out of all this. And I enjoyed it. It was a great last 8 days of the tournament for me.
Good. And we're going to talk about the finals during the latter part of this conversation. We're going to do just a bunch of quick hitters because the last one we did, I think, was Wednesday during the first week because both of us were traveling. So this will be a fun kind of I'm going to throw out some names and topics, and I'm going to give you a chance to discuss it briefly, and then just go from there. And we'll conclude with the finals on both sides.
Sure.
Let's lead off. Coco Gauff. And my question for you is, the day before she lost to Emma, Iga Swiatek lost. And I don't want to ever use the words immature for Coco because she is so mature for her age. But the question that was raised to me, and I disagree with it because I think Coco handles things so well and she's always so mature. Do you think, unconsciously that, or subconsciously maybe is the better word, she maybe put her foot off the gas once she saw Iga lose the prior day before? I don't think she did, and I think Emma Navarro played a great match. But your thoughts on that one?
No, I actually think it might have been a bit of the opposite in that she got a little uptight. It's like she knew, okay, she looked around, saw those names and thought, and she's always very ambitious and she always envisions herself winning these big tournaments. And obviously she has one in her pocket already with the US Open last year. But no, I think she thought there was a big opportunity ahead. And then she wasn't quite ready for what Navarro threw at her. And Navarro had already upended Naomi Osaka in the first rate performance. And what did surprise me, there was a lot of angst from Coco. And she was looking up at her group in the stands, at Brad Gilbert and the others, and venting a bit. And granted, she had moments like that during the US Open last year and got through it. But to me, that whole match turned. She was serving at 4-5 in the first set, got broken, and she never really could. It was an irrevocable blow, you could say, and she never did recover. And look, she'll be back on the hard court soon and trying to defend her Open title. She'll get over it, but I think she saw a real opportunity.
Yeah, and I should mention, Sabalenka was not in the mix either, so that may have even highlighted some of the, what you said is like, this is a huge opportunity. But all right, next player I want to throw out, Lulu Sun. And a fun fact about Lulu Sun, she makes the quarters of Wimbledon. She was the deciding match to win the NCAA championship against Pepperdine in 2021. And know who else was also on that Texas team? Was Peyton Stearns. So that team was loaded, and we all know Peyton has had some really good results this year, has played some top players very, very well. So imagine that as a college team. And Lulu was a freshman that year, Steve. Quarterfinal appearance for her. Tremendous tournament.
Yeah, it was. I mean, everybody was talking about her. Everybody was impressed with her. And she really, I mean, she was the talk of the press room at that stage of the tournament. And I don't know what the odds were on her getting that far, but she did a great job, and she's really a lot of fun to watch. And I hope it's the start of something. I hope it's not. Sometimes players do something like that and can never replicate it again. I don't think that's the case with her.
Next up, Sasha Zverev. In Australia, he was up 2-0 and lost. The French Open, he was up 2-1 and lost. Wimbledon, he was up 2-love and lost to Taylor Fritz. Those are killer matches to lose, Steve.
Yeah, in fairness, in this case, it was, to me, it was a bit more on the physical side. He had hurt himself, hurt the knee, and a round or two earlier, and it wasn't that he looked like he was in agony. And this was a server's contest against Taylor Fritz. You know, it was a 7-6, 6-4, 7-6, 6-4. They all were a couple of tiebreakers, couple of 6-4 sets, and finally he goes down in the fifth. And I think he wasn't moving terribly well at the end. I honestly think this was not like the previous instances that you just mentioned, where I thought, in a way, you know, the opportunity to win the French and being up 2-1 against Carlos really got in his head, and he had Medvedev 2-11 in Australia, and this time I honestly believe his body was betraying him, and it probably cost him the match. Great effort from Taylor, but I felt some sympathy for Zverev under those circumstances.
Well said. All right. I want to talk about two Americans. They're going to be tough, and I have thoughts on both. But the good news is this was the first time two U.S. men have made the quarters at Wimbledon since 2000. I think there were three at that time. I think it was Andre, Pete, and I think Jan Michael Gamble was the third one also that year.
Yeah.
All right, let's start with Tommy versus Carlos. And I don't know, I may have posted it on Twitter. I don't remember, but I definitely told a bunch of friends via text or verbally that Tommy was going to upset Carlos. And the reason I said that was not, I wasn't positive that Tommy was going to win, but I felt comfortable about it because Tommy has played Carlos tough before. He's beaten him tough before. It was 2-2 head to head. Tommy had won a bunch of matches in a row coming in on grass to this match. I said, if there's a setup where Tommy's going to beat Carlos, remember, Carlos wasn't playing that great up until that match. He had trouble with Francis. He got out of that match. I thought this was right for Tommy to upset Carlos, and he's up 7-5-2-0, and I felt good. And then, you know, the match switched from there.
Oh, completely. I can understand why you felt that way, because he had played him tough. But I felt like in this case, he was a little too anxious to get forward. He really wanted to get to the net a lot, and it's something that he's been exploring all year long, is the idea of to approach the net more frequently and really try to attack. And he missed a lot of approach shots by going too close to the lines out of respect for Carlos's speed, getting frustrated after losing those points. And yeah, after he had the set and a break, the last two sets, not many chances there, and he got outclassed, and Carlos was just much better on the grass. Going in, yeah, he did have a shot, and the head-to-head record was no accident. But if I were Tommy, I would go back to being a bit more baseline oriented and try to out rally him more than he did that day, because in the end, I thought he maybe played into Carlos's hands the last two sets.
Right. And you remember the effort. Tommy's been doing that against some other top players. You remember in Indian Wells, he did that versus Daniil Medvedev very successfully. So in your case, maybe it was too much, too often. In this case, obviously Carlos plays different than Daniil Medvedev. So it's a little different.
Totally different. Carlos is more willing to have, more happier to have that target. I think it made a lot more sense against Medvedev on hard than it did against Carlos on the grass.
All right. So the second one I want to talk about is Taylor Fritz versus Musetti. And no disrespect to Musetti. Musetti's been playing very well. You know, especially clay courts. He gives Novak a scare, you know, a couple times in Roland Garros. But this one is going to hurt immensely for Taylor and Michael Russell and the team. And I have the utmost respect for Michael Russell. I think he is one of the nicest guys on tour. I've known him for several years right now. So I want to, you know, this one hurt a little bit for me too. Not nearly as much as it hurt for Taylor and his team, but I go back to the fact that yes, a lot of it is matchups, and you hear it in different sports, even in NCAA tournament games, basketball games. It's not always about seeds; it's about matchups. But Steve, you're playing the 25th seed in a quarterfinal to get to a semifinal at Wimbledon, Steve. You know, generally when you're in a quarterfinal, you're going to be playing a Medvedev, a Zverev, who Taylor beat the previous rounds. That was a bad example. But you know what I'm getting at? A Medvedev, a Carlos, a Novak. You're going to be playing top, a top player in the quarters to get a 25th seed, Steve, and to not be able to overcome that hurdle. That's going to be a tough one to swallow for Taylor and the team.
Well, first, for a meager defense before I agree with you ultimately, and that would just simply be that Musetti played Djokovic at the French and lost in 5, and Djokovic said that's he played the tennis of his life. He said that at the time. And we all thought, okay, well, he had his shot on the clay. We're not going to see anything from him on the grass. And then he's in the final of Queens, losing to Tommy Paul. So that was a step forward, and he played well through Wimbledon. And yet, that I don't disagree that in the end that should have been Taylor's match. But I just mean that he was a number 25 who's not playing really. He's playing a higher caliber tennis at this stage. Nevertheless, Fritz is up a set. Stranglehold on this match. That set slipped away quickly, as did the third. He recovers to win the fourth, and you're thinking, okay, he'll take control now. And he played a terrible fifth. Yeah. Listen, it was very disappointing. I don't know, he got broken far too many times. His forehand was really fragile, David. I was stunned by some of the forehand mistakes he made, which were glaring errors. And I give Musetti credit because he gave him different trajectories and mixed up his ground game well and found a way to break down that Fritz forehand. But it was a disappointing performance. He could have had himself in the penultimate round playing against Novak Djokovic, who beat him in the quarters of the U.S. Open last year, and then again in the quarters of the Australian this year. And that would have been a nice reward for winning this match. He didn't give it to himself. Too much looking up at his camp. It was a frustrating day for him over on court 1. I don't know whether maybe it was an adjustment. Players, he's come off a center court match against Zverev, but he did not acquit himself well in that match. And I'm sure it was very frustrating. He's resilient. He'll bounce back. I've seen him suffer so many losses and just get right on with it and come out of slumps. He'll be fine, but that was a golden opportunity missed.
Yeah, and to me, my point, and you kind of you hit on it as well. It's not that if he wins that match, he wins the tournament. I'm not saying that at all. He'd have to play Novak and Carlos, in the semis and finals. It's just he's been so close. A couple years before, he lost to Rafa in that brutal quarterfinal, and then Rafa had to pull out in the semi. But it's when you have these opportunities, and quarterfinals at Wimbledon, they don't come up every time. It's hard to get to a quarter. It's really hard to get to a quarter. And when you have an opportunity like that, it's just a tough one to swallow.
Yeah, it is. But it's funny that you'd mentioned the Nadal match, because Rafa obviously was hurting. His camp wanted him. His father wanted him to stop. He played on. He won it in a 5th set tiebreaker. Taylor had a lot of chances that day. That was also pretty agonizing, but at least it was Nadal, a 2-time champion, a little more forgivable in his mind. And then the other 2 quarterfinal losses he had, of course, were both to Novak, as I referenced already at the U.S. Open.
But you're emphasizing my point. You're losing to Novak and Rafa. Here you got Musetti, and no matter how good he's playing, that's an unbelievable opportunity to advance.
No, it was. And then Musetti did play a good semi against Djokovic. He didn't win a set, but he really kind of, the fans find that they really loved watching him play. And he made all 3 sets competitive. But no, Taylor, I'm sure he will lament this one for quite a long time, David. And you got to move on. But he was not able to impose himself in that match the way he should have.
Yeah, I agree. But like you said, the hard courts are coming now, and he plays very well on that surface. So hopefully he can get on a roll and make a run at some of the bigger tournaments this summer, and then culminating in at the U.S. Open. All right, women's final: Barbara Krejcikova over Paolini in 3 sets. A few things here, and quote John Wertheim in his 50 parting thoughts that he does for Sports Illustrated. Fun fact: in 2018 Australian Open qualifying, first round, these 2 players faced each other. I don't even know who won that match, but that's how far they've come in 6 years. First off, Paolini, I mean, oh my gosh, a heck of a couple months, Steve. The first one to do this since Serena in 2016, back to back. So unbelievable. Good for the financial aspect. My God, she made more money in a few months than maybe, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's got to be close to some of her career prize money.
Yeah. But the other thing is, yes, it's a great achievement. Back-to-back major finals, clay, grass. but she did a much better job. Obviously, she was not playing someone as formidable as Iga Swiatek
Right.
was when she had to play her in the Roland Garros final. So this one was really hard fought 3-set match. She was right in there, and I thought she might pull it off in the third. She wasn't quite good enough. She lost to a player who was actually a better grass court player, no doubt about it. But she came off a win over Bekic in the semis, and Bekic could well have beaten her too. And that was impressive. Paolini is just she's a fierce competitor and has a certain exuberance about her on the court that the fans are very attracted to. So good for her, because if she can do that well on both clay and grass, why couldn't she have a great summer on the hard courts and maybe make a bid for a U.S. Open final? She's arrived.
Yeah. And Krejcikova, I mean, she was 13 for 13, Steve, in first serve points won in the third set up until 30-love 5-4. And then she got a little tight, but that's some incredible serving. It was a nervy finish, but she got through, you know, 2 major singles titles, Roland Garros in 2021, this Wimbledon in 2024, 7 women's doubles Grand Slam titles, 3 mixed doubles Grand Slam titles, an Olympic doubles champion, Steve. Quite a resume.
No, it's a great resume. I don't see her winning another singles major, but so what, you could say, because she's got 2 and all the other titles you just mentioned in doubles and mixed. So this had to be, I mean, listen, she had to be shocked. She could have been out of there in the first round. She was very close to bowing out then, and she goes all the way. Nobody saw this one coming. She played a great semi. It was, everybody was thinking Rybakina will get her second title by that stage of the tournament. Coming into the semis, we all liked her chances. She just outplayed her across the board. I was amazed. I didn't think she could break her as many times as she did. Rybakina is the best server around, but that to me was no disrespect to Paolini, but it was the semi that from Krejcikova's standpoint.
And now we will turn our attention to the men's final, a rematch from last year, 2023 5-set final. Carlos beat Novak. This final was obviously very different from that one. Just a couple things. This was the first, Novak is the first player in the open era to reach 10 men's singles finals at 3 majors. I mean, the record books keep getting written. Let's not forget the surgery was just 37 or 38 days prior to him going. He came here just to hit a few balls and then test the knee, played some practice sets, played an exhibition to get to the final. Let's not minimize that accomplishment at all. It is incredible. Carlos, now with the win over Novak, 6-0 against top 5 players this year. Novak hasn't had a top 10 win, let alone a title this year. Now, again, he's played an abbreviated schedule. We get that. But this match was very different than the one a year ago. A year ago, 6-1 Novak, first set in about 15 minutes. This first game took almost the whole time of the first set from last year. It was a 13+ minute game. Carlos breaks Novak and winds up winning the first set 6-2. What were your initial thoughts coming in and then when you saw that first set?
Yeah, I mean, it was very close to 14 minutes. I looked up the scoreboard and like the second after that point was won, it got to 14 minutes. Look, first game was very important because it was 7 deuces and Novak had 3 game points, and it just makes a big difference if you can get out of a game like that, where they both actually played quite well in the opening game. A lot of very good shot making, but I think it bruised him a lot because, the next thing you know, Carlos has a quick, easy hold, and Djokovic is down 15-30 in the third game, and that whole first set was uphill. It was a real battle for him, and Carlos was just in the zone. He really was. I mean, he certainly has never played a better major final than this one. The previous 3, with Casper Ruud at the Open in 22, tough 4-setter, 5-setter with Novak here, 5-setter with Zverev at the French this year. They've all been tough. He really peaked for this one. And Djokovic, I think, Novak was slightly off. There's no doubt about it. He said after the match, he felt like he was half a step behind him the whole match. And he felt like he was outplayed in every facet of the game. And I think he meant it. So that first set ended up flying by. And then surprising to me was when Novak got broken in the first game of the second set
Same
again.
thing, right?
That
Same
like,
thing as
oh my
first set.
God, royal box end again, serving from the royal box end. And I thought he would really bear down hard and get going there. And so that set also disappeared quickly. He lost one service game on a double. He was going for a couple of big second serves, maybe attacking a little more than he needed to, whatever the case. 6-2, 6-2. Now, I did think Novak played much better in the third. He actually had a break point that could have given him 4-2.
I was going to say that 2-3 game in the third set was a crucial hold from Carlos.
Yeah, oh, he had the break point. He played a really good game, but Carlos came up with a perfect serve down the tee to stop him on the break point, and then so now it's 3-all, and then at 4-all, Novak gets broken in a pretty routine break. And I think
now stop, because I'll set the stage for the 5-4 break, right? 4-4 break. Carlos serves for it. He goes up 40 love, Steve. All right. And you think, wow, 6-2, 6-2, 6-4. This is as routine as it can be in a major final. 5-4, 40 love. Carlos does not close it out. Now, the last person you want to face to not close a match out is Novak Djokovic. And we can talk about a plethora of matches that Novak has saved match points in majors, in slams, that have come back and won. 3 of them that I know off the top of my head against one of the greatest players of all time, Roger Federer, which is we all know of. So at 5-4, 40 love, Carlos doesn't finish. Are you thinking now, wow, I mean, this is going to go in a whole different direction? Or were you, as on the other side, impressed as all can be that Carlos holds it together when he's down 5-6, he holds his serve to get to a tiebreaker?
No, well, first let's go back to 5-4. I mean, Novak thought he was gone, and Carlos threw in a double fault on 40 love, and you still don't think much of it. And the next thing you know, a couple of errors. The third match point, Djokovic hit a return that was sort of high, almost like a lob return, and somebody screamed out in the crowd. Carlos handled that moment very well, didn't complain. When Djokovic got the break for 5-all, I looked at him, and you could see there was no animation. You expected to see him almost pumping his fist like, all right, fellow, you just gave me an opening, and I'm going to take it. No, he was still very subdued. He played a good service game, though, to get to 6-5 before Carlos played a perfect game to hold for the breaker. But again, we get to the breaker, and Novak, the master of the tiebreak, he didn't play a good tiebreak. No. He really didn't. He made a bad. He got down 3-1 back to 3-all, and then made a bad error off his forehand, and Carlos ended up winning at 7-4. And again, even in the tiebreak, you would have expected that Novak might say, okay, I'm a little bit like with Sinner in Australia, where he down 2 sets and he won a tiebreak. And you're thinking, okay, where's the animation? He didn't feel it. He just didn't feel it that day. You could tell he felt he just didn't have any sense of encouragement or spark or belief. And Carlos was very poised in that tiebreak. Listen, he didn't let that crisis, that shocking service break against him in the 10th game get to him at all. And he showed that at 5-6 and again in the breaker. So full marks to him. But obviously Novak he did not have you're talking. And also let's keep in mind, when you bring up those other matches, such as the 3 against Federer at the 2010, 2011 US Open semis, and again at Wimbledon in 2019, every time the match points were in the 5th set. And there's a big difference when you're down 2 sets like this and trying to save it. He just didn't. I don't know whether I don't think the knee was bothering him necessarily.
I wanted to ask you about that. Because I thought maybe it was maybe it was a bias because I knew of the injury, of the surgery that he came on. But Brad Gilbert made a really good tweet as well. I thought he did not move as well in this match versus Carlos. Now, a lot of times your opponent can make you look slow for a number of reasons: pace of ball, type of dictation of points. But Brad made a comment on Twitter I thought was really good. From the backhand corner, Novak usually goes open stance on that, and it can help his recovery. Brad did not see the explosiveness of that open stance backhand and recovering quickly. And that didn't make Carlos have to go over, too overpowering on that next ball. Carlos was still able to control the points without even going super big. But Did you think Novak's movement was
A
limited
little,
a little bit?
yeah, a little subpar. That's a great point by Brad. I didn't think he was as quite as good as usual on the running forehand either. He made a few, but not as many as he usually does. So yes, you got to take that into account because the surgery was so close to Wimbledon. 3.5 weeks is really what it was, and that's asking a lot of yourself. And you could see in the early rounds, David, that he was he was trying to see how much he could push the knee. And then in the fourth round, he fell down a few times against Holger Rune, and you worried about it, but he got up and he played fine. And it was like he was building for something. But against Carlos, I mean, against the other guys, 90% would be good enough.
Right.
90% physical. Against Carlos, he had to be 100 to 101% that day. And it wasn't there. Now, I will say this, when it comes to the speed that you're mentioning, and yes, was he a little slower than usual? Yes, but Carlos is so quick that next to him, how can anybody slow? He made Medvedev look like an old man at times. So I just feel like it's compounded, it's magnified because of the alacrity that with which Alcaraz covers the court is ridiculous. And he was moving like a gazelle that day. So it was the combination of the two. But definitely there were, Djokovic was not in the usual big match state that you see him in, and Alcaraz exploited. Now, it was a subpar performance of Djokovic, but one really sublime, virtuoso display from Alcaraz. And think about it, as you were mentioning relating to Tommy Paul, Alcaraz, the first two rounds was not that great. There was a 7-6, 7-5, 6-2, and then the next one wasn't that great. And then Tiafoe takes him to 5. He's 2-1, 4-all, love 30.
Yep.
And then you got Ugo and Bear, almost took him to 5. It was 4. And Tommy takes a set off him, and Medvedev takes a set off him. So that's why, to me, it was so shocking what he did in the final. Not that he won, but that he could win by those decisive scores. And given what had led up to it, there were some patchy play from him in all the other matches, and he buckled down when he had to and played great in the clutch. But this one, from start to finish, and even with the blip at 5-4 in the third, it really didn't matter the way he responded after that to salvage the set.
Yeah, I mean, just a huge credit mentally for him, and the coaching job that Juan Carlos Ferrero does, and that whole team. He's done incredible work with Carlos, because a lot of people
David, just a quick point on that. You're right, and Novak saluted Juan Carlos. Everybody does, but I want to say this: I think he's probably an easy guy to coach because he is so gifted, and I think we also underestimate his own instincts when he's playing well and confident. Now, there've been stretches, obviously, after Wimbledon last year, he had a long drought, and the rest of the year was not kind to him. It wasn't terrible, but he wasn't winning any tournaments until Indian Wells, but this year. But I think he is just so versatile and so complete. And I think he can figure things out for himself. And I get the feeling that Ferrero is going to let him do that more and more as time goes on. But I think any coach would like to, and this is no knock on Ferrero, but it's a little bit like when Paul Annacone is coaching Roger Federer and Pete Sampras. I mean, you're dealing with giants. So as long as you don't overstep or complicate matters, you're probably going to do very well as the coach when you have players that are that great.
I do want to mention a stat. I'm going to throw, it's about Carlos serving and his percentages. And I'm going to throw out 3 percentages. And the lowest percentage is the one that I'm going to really stress on how great it was that Carlos was able to do that. And the first serve percentage for the men's final was 59%. He was 84%. He won 84% of the points when his first serve got it. Now, You could say for huge servers, a John Isner or whatnot, those could be numbers like that, right? But the last number that I want to stress, Steve, 51% of the points on second serves he won. And when you play Novak is usually all over your opponent. Novak's opponent is not winning over 50% of the opponent's second serve points. There's just no way. And to Carlos be 51%, pretty incredible.
No, you would Novak will often keep his opponents down to 35% of second serve points, or maybe at most 40. No, it was, look, second serve had a lot of depth and bite on it that day. The first serve was absolutely extraordinary. And that was something that Djokovic alluded to after the match, David, was he was surprised. He didn't realize, he had never seen Carlos serve like that before against him. He said that kind of caught him off guard. And he was shocked by some of the numbers, the 136s. But Carlos definitely been building toward this the whole tournament. He was often going in that 130 range. It's just he didn't serve nearly as consistently. And that, again, is what's remarkable. Is if you look at his other matches, how many times some of these other guys broke him. And Novak breaks him once, and that's at 5-4 in the third when he's down 4 triple match point. It was almost a miracle that he got the break. And there were very few other service games where he even got to break point. There was that one at 3-2 in the third and one more in the first set. I think that was it. So it actually was an outstanding. The serving performance from Carlos was so remarkable that it opened up all the other avenues to his game. It loosened him up. He was getting through his serve so fast most of the time that enabled him to start relaxing more on his returns and going for his shots and just pulling out his full arsenal. So it was a great performance from him. And Djokovic fully acknowledged it. Having said that, I think that as long as the knee doesn't act up anymore, I don't know what's going to happen in the Olympics, which is going to be kind of wide open, difficult for everybody because they're going out onto the clay, from grass back to clay, clay to grass back to clay now, from Roland Garros, Wimbledon, Olympics. But when we get to the hard courts, Djokovic will be fresher than a lot of these other guys, given how relatively little he's played this year. So I do expect him to make a really stirring bid to retain his U.S. Open crown. And that's going to be a great Open because Sinner had won Australian, has been disappointed in the two majors since. Carlos has won the last two majors, and Djokovic is thirsting to get his first one of the year. So the Open might end up being the best men's major of the year.
We shall see. Hopefully everyone's healthy and can make a run. Just a few things to wrap up with Carlos. Only 6 men in the Open era have won Roland Garros and Wimbledon the same year. Laver, Borg, Nadal, Federer, Novak, and now Carlos. Andre Agassi was very close. In 1999, he won the French, and then he lost Wimbledon in the final with Pete Sampras. Pete blitzed them pretty good that day. Carlos is the youngest to win 4 slams on 3 different surfaces. We all know how well-rounded he is. And it was an incredible performance in that men's final. As far as what's going on post Wimbledon, we have Rafa playing right now, getting ready for the Olympics. He's playing with Casper Ruud. Well, Rafa's playing singles and doubles. I think he's won 2 matches with Casper. He won a close one today. He's still alive in singles. He's just preparing for the Olympics. But what else, Steve, before we wrap this one up? I know we have Newport going on right now too. That's a very special event for you. Obviously, being a Hall of Famer, I know you're looking forward to getting down there later in the week. Anything else you want to hit on before we wrap up?
No. I enjoyed the discussion. Yes, I am looking forward to Newport. And this is the year that Richard Evans, my colleague in the writing world, is going in from Great Britain and definitely very worthy of the honor. And we're going to get the 2 Indians, Leander Paes, the great doubles player, and Vijay Amritraj, who has done so much for the sport, both as a player and now as a broadcaster and promoter. So looking forward to that weekend. But no, it was a very enjoyable Wimbledon, and I had as much fun as I usually do, and I think we had quite a bit to chew on in this conversation, and I hope the listeners enjoyed it.
Well, I know I enjoyed it, and I always appreciate your time and insight, Steve. So thanks again, and we'll do this again real soon. Have fun in Newport.
Okay, thanks, David.